The night Marilyn Monroe walked into Frank Sinatra's Palm Springs compound in 1960, she had no idea she was stepping into a carefully orchestrated trap. The martinis were cold, the jazz was smooth, and the most powerful men in America were waiting. On one side of the room sat John F. Kennedy, the charismatic senator who would soon become president. On the other side, barely visible in the shadows, stood Sam Giancana, the most feared mobster in Chicago, a man who controlled politicians, union bosses, and entire cities. Frank Sinatra, standing at the bar with his trademark fedora and that dangerous smile, had brought them all together. But this wasn't just a party, it was an audition. The Rat Pack leader had promised the mob access to the Kennedys, and he'd promised the Kennedys plausible deniability through Hollywood glamour. Marilyn Monroe was the perfect intermediary, beautiful, desired, and tragically naive about the forces she was about to unleash. What happened that night would connect organized crime to the White House, and ultimately it would cost Marilyn her life. Because when you become useful to both the president and the mafia, you become dangerous to everyone. Before we dive deeper into this dangerous web of power, betrayal, and tragedy, please consider subscribing to our channel. We bring you the untold stories behind Hollywood's greatest legends, the secrets that changed history, and the truth that powerful people tried to bury. Frank Sinatra's relationship with organized crime had been carefully cultivated over 2 decades of mutual benefit. By the time he reached true stardom in the 1940s, he understood something fundamental. The line between legitimate business and organized crime was thinner than most people imagined. Sinatra brought respectability to men who lived in the shadows. When Sam Giancana sat in the front row at the Fontainebleau watching Sinatra perform, he wasn't just another mobster, he was Frank's friend. Sinatra, in turn, received protection, casino investments, and access to a network of power that extended from New Jersey to Las Vegas to Chicago. He performed at mob-owned venues without fear of labor troubles. His films received financing from sources that didn't ask questions. But this comfortable arrangement was about to become exponentially more complicated when Sinatra decided to add political power to his portfolio. The 1960 presidential campaign represented Sinatra's most ambitious play for influence, becoming the bridge between the Kennedy family and his underworld associates. Frank organized fundraisers, rallied Hollywood support, and recorded High Hopes as JFK's campaign theme. But more quietly, more dangerously, he was making promises to Sam Giancana and the Chicago outfit. The mob wanted Kennedy to win and believed Giancana could deliver Illinois through Union control. Sinatra vouched for the arrangement. The problem was that both sides believed Sinatra had more control than he actually possessed, and both sides expected payment. The Kennedys expected continued loyalty and discretion. The mob expected protection from federal prosecution, and Sinatra needed a way to keep both sides satisfied without exposing the true nature of his connections. Marilyn Monroe became that solution. Though she never understood she was being used as a diplomatic offering between two incompatible worlds. Sinatra had known Marilyn since the early 1950s. They shared a kinship. Both had clawed up from nothing. Both understood the loneliness of fame. When Sinatra began organizing gatherings at his Palm Springs estate in early 1960, Marilyn was recently divorced from Arthur Miller, vulnerable, seeking connection. What Marilyn didn't know was that these weren't casual parties. They were carefully staged opportunities for Sinatra to demonstrate his value to both the Kennedy campaign and his mob associates. Peter Lawford, married to JFK's sister Patricia, worked closely with Sinatra to create an environment where political fundraising, mob negotiations, and Hollywood glamour could intersect without obvious impropriety. The first meeting between Marilyn and John Kennedy occurred at one of these Palm Springs gatherings in February 1960, and Sam Giancana was staying in a guest house on the same property. The weekend was orchestrated with precision. Kennedy arrived Friday evening for campaign rest. Giancana arrived separately, maintaining the fiction he just happened to be visiting Frank. Marilyn was told it would be a small, intimate dinner. What transpired set in motion a chain of events that would entangle all of them in surveillance, blackmail, and lethal consequences. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had both the estate and Giancana under surveillance. Bureau reports note the presence of a prominent female motion picture star at a gathering that included both Kennedy and Giancana. Hoover understood immediately what Sinatra was attempting and began collecting evidence he could use as leverage. Marilyn's attraction to Kennedy was immediate and genuine. She saw in him something she'd been searching for. Unlike the baseball player who treated her as a trophy or the playwright who condescended to her intelligence, Kennedy appeared to value her mind as well as her beauty. He discussed politics with her, treated her as an equal in conversations about foreign policy. What Marilyn couldn't see was that Kennedy's charm was a political tool, refined over years of campaigning. She also didn't realize his interest was heightened by the fact that Sam Giancana found her fascinating. Kennedy understood that sharing Marilyn's company gave him something in common with the mob boss. Sinatra watched this develop with satisfaction, believing he'd created a bond that would protect his interests. But he failed to consider what would happen when the affair became too well known, or when Marilyn's emotional investment became too deep. By summer 1961, with Kennedy now president, the relationship had become an open secret in certain circles and a growing security concern. Marilyn's phone was tapped by multiple agencies, her movements monitored. She would tell friends she heard clicks on her phone lines, that cars followed her, that men in dark suits watched her house. The affair, conducted at Peter Lawford's beach house and during presidential California trips, grew increasingly reckless. Marilyn kept notes of their conversations in a red leather diary, jotting down Kennedy's comments about Cuba, the Soviet Union, his conflicts with Hoover. She believed she was documenting their intellectual connection. What she was creating was potential blackmail material, evidence of pillow talk between the president and a woman who had connections to mob figures through Sinatra. Sam Giancana watched Marilyn's relationship with Kennedy with great interest, seeing opportunities Sinatra hadn't considered. The Chicago boss had done his part in the 1960 election, allegedly manipulating Illinois vote counts. Now he expected reciprocity, protection from prosecution, favorable casino licensing, action against Castro's Cuba, where the mob had lost casino investments. But Attorney General Robert Kennedy was launching an unprecedented campaign against organized crime, targeting Giancana specifically. The betrayal was complete. The Kennedys had used mob support to win and were now prosecuting their former allies. Giancana felt used and furious, and he began to see Marilyn not just as a distraction, but as potential leverage. If the president wouldn't protect his mob allies, perhaps the threat of exposing his affair with America's most famous actress would change his calculations. Frank Sinatra's position became precarious as the Kennedy administration distanced itself from anyone with organized crime connections. In March 1962, President Kennedy was scheduled to stay at Sinatra's Palm Springs estate. Frank had spent months renovating, building a presidential guest wing. Then Attorney General Robert Kennedy intervened, informing his brother that staying at Sinatra's home was politically untenable given Frank's associations with Giancana. The president would stay at Bing Crosby's estate instead. Frank's rage was legendary. He took a sledgehammer to the presidential helipad he'd constructed. But the anger masked a more dangerous reality. Sinatra now had enemies on both sides. The Kennedys saw him as a liability. The mob saw him as a failed broker. And Marilyn, still emotionally entangled with both JFK and increasingly with Robert Kennedy, represented the last remaining connection between these incompatible worlds. By early 1962, Marilyn's relationship with President Kennedy had cooled, but a new affair had begun with Robert Kennedy, a development Giancana monitored with predatory interest. Robert was different, more intense, more intellectual, more emotionally available. Where JFK had treated Marilyn as a pleasant diversion, RFK seemed genuinely drawn to her vulnerability. They spoke for hours, discussing philosophy, civil rights, Marilyn's dream of being taken seriously. But RFK was married, deeply Catholic, and increasingly concerned about security implications of involvement with a woman under FBI surveillance who had connections to mob-affiliated individuals. The Cal Neva Lodge, a casino resort straddling the California-Nevada border at Lake Tahoe, became the stage for the final act. Sinatra owned a significant stake in Cal Neva, partnered with Sam Giancana in an arrangement that violated Nevada gaming laws. During the last weekend of July 1962, Marilyn was invited to Cal Neva by Sinatra for relaxation. What happened remains shrouded in mystery, but multiple witnesses reported seeing Marilyn severely drugged, barely able to walk, supported by unidentified men. Photographs were allegedly taken, and Marilyn later told her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, she felt used and violated in ways she couldn't articulate through her trauma. The evidence suggests Cal Neva was intended as a final pressure point, creating compromising material to control either Marilyn or the Kennedys or both. Giancana was reportedly there that weekend. Peter Lawford was there as Sinatra's liaison. Marilyn's statements to Dr. Greenson indicated she believed she'd been photographed in compromising situations, possibly without full awareness. Whether Sinatra fully understood what was orchestrated remains debatable, but his behavior afterward suggests guilt or fear or both. He became paranoid, dismissive of questions about that weekend, notably silent about Marilyn's deteriorating mental state. Marilyn returned to Los Angeles from Cal Neva in severe psychological distress, and the final week of her life was marked by frantic phone calls, threats to hold a press conference, desperate attempts to reach Robert Kennedy. She told friends she was tired of being used, tired of secrets, tired of men who promised love but delivered exploitation. The red leather diary where she'd recorded conversations with the Kennedy brothers became a source of obsession. She showed it to photographer William Woodfield, mentioned it in phone conversations almost certainly monitored by FBI surveillance. On August 4, 1962, Marilyn made 17 phone calls, including attempts to reach Robert Kennedy. Peter Lawford spoke to her that evening, reporting she sounded drugged and depressed, slurring her words as she said goodbye in a way that frightened him. The official narrative, suicide by barbiturate overdose, discovered by housekeeper Eunice Murray around 3:30 a.m. on August 5th, has been challenged by inconsistencies. Neighbors reported seeing lights and activity earlier. The ambulance company claimed they were called while Marilyn was still alive. Her phone records disappeared. Most significantly, high barbiturate levels showed no residue in her stomach, suggesting drugs were administered through other means, inconsistent with oral suicide. Peter Lawford received a strange call instructing him to say nothing. Bobby Kennedy was reportedly seen in Los Angeles that night by multiple witnesses, though the family maintained he was in San Francisco. In the days following Marilyn's death, Frank Sinatra's behavior was notably strange for someone who'd been her friend for over a decade. He made no public statement, attended no memorial, refused to discuss her death. When asked about Cal Neva, he became hostile, threatening legal action. His silence was particularly conspicuous given his usual loyalty to friends. Those close to Sinatra reported he seemed haunted by guilt, drinking heavily, prone to angry outbursts when Marilyn's name was mentioned. Whether this guilt stemmed from introducing her to dangerous people, failing to protect her at Cal Neva, or knowledge of what happened the night she died remains unknowable. Sam Giancana's reaction was equally revealing. He appeared satisfied rather than sorrowful, telling associates the problem had been handled. FBI surveillance reports note Giancana seemed relieved after weeks of stress. He'd been under intense federal pressure from Robert Kennedy's Justice Department. Marilyn's death coincided with a sudden decrease in government interest in certain Kennedy mob connections, suggesting whatever leverage she represented had been neutralized. The red leather diary vanished after her death and has never been recovered. Multiple witnesses confirmed its existence. Photographer William Woodfield examined it. Hairdresser Sidney Gilleroff heard Marilyn read from it. The last person known to have possessed it was Eunice Murray, who had connections to Dr. Greenson and possibly to intelligence agencies monitoring Marilyn. When investigators tried to locate the diary, Murray claimed no knowledge. Police made no mention of finding it. The most disturbing possibility is that the diary was removed from Marilyn's home the night she died by someone who understood its potential to destroy careers. Frank Sinatra's Cal Neva license was revoked by Nevada authorities in October 1963, officially due to Giancana's presence, belated enforcement of regulations quietly ignored for years. The timing suggested authorities had been waiting for the Marilyn situation to settle. Frank sold his stake at significant loss and never spoke publicly about why this prized investment became untenable. Those close to him reported he viewed the revocation as punishment for something larger, a message that his usefulness as a bridge between worlds had ended and his discretion was expected and required. Peter Lawford, the Kennedy brother-in-law who served as liaison, was destroyed by his knowledge. His marriage to Patricia Kennedy ended in 1966, with family reportedly blaming him for embarrassments surrounding the Marilyn affair. He descended into severe alcoholism, making cryptic statements about knowing too much. In his final years, Lawford began hinting at truth, that Marilyn hadn't committed suicide, that powerful people had been at her house, that he'd been ordered to remain silent. He died in 1984. Liver destroyed, career over. His fate served as warning. Loyalty was rewarded with survival, but only as long as silence remained absolute. Sam Giancana never faced consequences for his role, but became a liability to power structures. By mid-1970s, with congressional investigations into CIA mob collaborations gaining momentum, Giancana was scheduled to testify before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. In June 1975, days before testimony, he was shot 7 times in the face while cooking in his Oak Park home. The professional hit ensured permanent silence about CIA deals, Kennedy administration connections, and potentially about what happened to Marilyn. His murder remains unsolved. Frank Sinatra lived until 1998, carrying secrets for 36 years, never speaking publicly about Cal Neva or the dangerous arrangements he'd facilitated. Friends reported he kept a photograph of Marilyn in his private office and would stare at it with profound sadness. When Marilyn's name came up in later years, Sinatra became emotional in uncharacteristic ways. He allegedly told his daughter Tina in the 1990s that he regretted introducing certain people, that he'd thought he was helping Marilyn network but had exposed her to predators. Whether this represented genuine remorse or rationalization remained ambiguous. What's certain is that Sinatra learned too late that some connections are too dangerous to broker and that using a vulnerable friend as currency between incompatible power structures carries a cost that can never be repaid. The FBI files on Marilyn, released incrementally through Freedom of Information requests, reveal extensive surveillance but frustratingly redacted details. Entire pages are blacked out. References to confidential informants remain protected. What the files confirm is that J. Edgar Hoover was obsessed with the Kennedy-Monroe relationship and saw it as potential leverage. Hoover had recordings, photographs, testimony from wiretaps documenting the affair and mob connections. Whether he used this as blackmail or kept it as insurance remains unclear. But the files establish that Marilyn was not simply a celebrity who died tragically. She was a woman whose relationships made her a national security concern, a mob target, and ultimately a problem someone decided required permanent resolution. The true tragedy isn't just that it may have cost her life. It's that she believed powerful men valued her mind. Kennedy discussed foreign policy with her. Robert spoke about philosophy. Giancana treated her with courtesy. But all were using her as social currency, as political cover, as blackmail material, as connection between incompatible worlds. Sinatra, who genuinely cared for Marilyn, made the catastrophic error of believing he could introduce her to dangerous circles without consequence. The lesson, learned too late, was that there is no neutral ground between political power and organized crime, no safe space where Hollywood glamour can bridge that divide without casualties. In 6 decades since Marilyn's death, countless theories have emerged, but evidence consistently points to inescapable conclusions. First, she did not die alone. Witnesses place people at her home that night. Second, her death served multiple agendas, silencing a woman who knew too much, eliminating blackmail potential, removing a public relations problem. Third, powerful people obscured truth, evidence disappeared, witnesses changed stories, investigations were shut down. And fourth, Sinatra's role as connector made him complicit in creating circumstances that led to her death, whether or not he intended that outcome. The Cal Neva Lodge burned down in 1963, just months after Sinatra was forced to sell. The fire destroyed whatever evidence might have remained from that July weekend. The resort was rebuilt and operates today as a vintage getaway, brochures mentioning Sinatra and the Rat Pack but omitting darker chapters. The sanitized history reflects how thoroughly dangerous truth has been buried beneath nostalgic entertainment narratives. Robert Kennedy never publicly acknowledged their relationship and maintained complete silence about her death. His assassination in June 1968 ended any possibility he might reveal truth. Like his brother, Robert's death involved ambiguities, Sirhan's mob connections, CIA links, evidence suggesting multiple shooters. The pattern of silencing those connected to dangerous secrets repeated. Today, Marilyn's legacy has been sanitized, remembered as tragic icon of beauty and vulnerability, victim of fame's pressures. The conventional narrative focuses on difficult childhood, failed marriages, addiction battles. What excluded is the political dimension, the mob connections that made her dangerous, and Sinatra's role in facilitating relationships that destroyed her. Biographies mention Kennedy affairs as romantic footnotes without exploring how those relationships connected her to organized crime. The truth that Marilyn was murdered or allowed to die because she knew too much about presidential power and mob influence, and that Frank Sinatra helped create those lethal connections, remains too disturbing for mainstream acceptance. The final, most disturbing question remains unanswered. Did Frank Sinatra know what was going to happen that night in August 1962? Was he informed Marilyn had become too dangerous, needed silencing? Or did he learn about her death shocked and guilty at the realization that connections he'd facilitated had consumed her? His absolute silence, refusal to attend memorials, decades of refusing discussion suggest either guilty knowledge or profound shame. What's certain is that Sinatra spent 36 years carrying secrets that died with him in 1998, ensuring full truth about how Hollywood's biggest star became a liability would remain forever incomplete, protected by the code of silence that governed his life between entertainment and organized crime. Marilyn Monroe died at 36, potential unfulfilled, search for genuine love ending in betrayal and probable murder. She wanted to be taken seriously, to move beyond the dumb blonde stereotype. She wanted to be loved for her mind, to find a partner who saw her complexity. And she wanted to belong to the world of power and influence, to matter beyond box office appeal. Sinatra offered her access, introduced her to presidents and power brokers, made her feel she'd transcended Hollywood limitations. But the world he connected her to was fundamentally predatory, populated by men who saw everything as transactional and everyone as either useful or expendable. When Marilyn stopped being useful, when her instability threatened to expose secrets, when her diary became blackmail potential, when her demands became inconvenient, she became expendable. And the same connections that made her feel valued ensured her elimination could be accomplished quietly, her death explained as another tragic Hollywood suicide, her dangerous knowledge buried with her body. If you've stayed with this story to its conclusion, you understand Marilyn's death was not simple tragedy, it was political murder disguised as suicide, orchestrated or enabled by people who valued secrets more than her life. Sinatra's role in creating these circumstances, whether through active conspiracy or catastrophic misjudgment, marks him as complicit in one of Hollywood's darkest chapters. The truth has been buried for 6 decades under official narratives, family denials, institutional cover-ups, but evidence points consistently toward coordinated silencing of a woman who knew too much and trusted too easily. Her final weeks were spent desperately trying to reach people she thought cared, trying to leverage knowledge into protection. Instead, she discovered that dangerous knowledge makes you dangerous to know, that powerful men protect themselves first, and that friendship with people like Sinatra, men who navigate multiple worlds and owe allegiance to none, offers no safety when institutional interests demand silence. Marilyn deserved better than the death she received, and better than the sanitized legacy that followed. The least we can do, 60 years later, is remember her as more than a tragic icon. Remember her as a woman who was used, betrayed, and likely murdered by men she trusted, and whose death was facilitated by connections that should never have been made.